On today's show, the 2023-24 season is now over for the Atlanta Hawks as a result of a blowout loss in Chicago. We'll get into how this one unfolded, what it says about the future, and much more, and all of that is on the way.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1697 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday evening into Thursday. It is deep in the night. In fact, it is Thursday morning as I record this podcast, and I want to encourage you, as I always do, at the top of the podcast, make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Please subscribe to the podcast anywhere you find podcasts. That includes Apple and Spotify. We're also on YouTube on the video side, and it's been a very busy week, as you might expect. Lots of prep for the play-in, full breakdowns and previews and all that stuff. And if you're a new listener, I do appreciate you joining the show. But most of the way tonight will be focused on what became a 131-116 loss for the Hawks in Chicago and the end of the 23-24 season for Atlanta in Game 83. This matchup was basically set for a long time, at least unofficially, and then it became officially set for quite some time after that. And it did not go the way that some thought it might. I thought the Hawks had a pretty good chance to win this one if they showed up and played well. In the end, though, they were shorthanded. They had the worst as far as health situation on their roster compared to Chicago. And they had a brutal opening quarter. They were down by 18 points, and that kind of set the stage a little bit. They did come back. They were within 3 points a couple of times after that comeback, but then they gave up what turned out to be a game-breaking run to kind of break things open in the second half. And the end result was a 15-point loss, the first play-in loss in Hawks history. Of course, a small sample size there, but they had been 3-0 previously. They finally lost one of these, and, of course, the end of the season. So we'll get into all of it as I sort of always do. I'm sure I have some extra listeners this evening, and we definitely encourage you to come back. And by the way, I'll say it again later in the show, we do not go on hiatus in the offseason. We are here all summer long. So go ahead and subscribe now if you are a diehard or even a casual Hawks fan. I will be here to guide you through the offseason as well. But we'll kind of go big picture early on in the podcast. What went wrong in this game is sort of the headline of that. In the middle, we'll kind of talk about the ins and outs of how this game unfolded during the game. At the end of the show, we'll talk about how all the players who performed in the rotation, how they all looked, and most of them, of course, struggled in this game. And then a brief look at the very end of the podcast to what's to come this summer, because it's going to be a very, very interesting, busy, intriguing, question-filled summer for the Hawks. At any rate, the headliner of the game, for sure, is that the defense was mostly atrocious in this game. That was showing up on the scoreboard for the most part. The Bulls had 131 points, and that actually wasn't indicative of how bad it was at times. In fact, Atlanta had about a 130-ish defensive rating in the game. That is pretty bad in any context. But that included a fourth quarter in which the Bulls were just trying to bleed the clock out, basically. They were kind of playing stall offense in the fourth quarter. They only had 21 points in the fourth. They had less than 100 offensive rating in the fourth quarter. In the first three quarters, which I would call the more competitive portion of this game, the Bulls had about 140 offensive rating, which is just staggering considering Chicago is not a dynamic offensive team. They have guys who are dynamic. Kobe White was great in this game, for instance, but it wasn't like you were facing the Celtics or the Nuggets or somebody that's going to run you out of the gym. The Bulls are not that team, and they look like the team in this game. So before I go any further on kind of what went actually wrong in this game and how ugly the numbers were, I do have to note, for the purposes of context and nuance, which I always try to give you on this podcast, that simply put, the personnel the Hawks had available defensively in this game was not conducive to success on that end of the floor. So people do know this, I'm sure. I'll just recount a little bit here. The Hawks were playing without three of their top 8 players in this game, and the 3 guys who were hurt, Johnson, Okongwu, and Bey, are all front court guys who have either length or physicality or all that, or multiple things of that. And basically, their 2 best front court athletes, Johnson and Kong, were not playing in this game. Plus, the Bulls had some injury concerns as well. But the 2 guys who were questionable for Chicago ended up playing in this game. The Hawks, rightly, in my opinion, even though it didn't really work out, started Trae, DeJounte, and Bogey together on the perimeter. That is logical because they were going to play a lot of minutes. They, of course, they really only had 5 guys that you fully trust, and they started them in this game. But that trio does not often play a lot of minutes together. And there's a reason for that. And it's because defensively, it's not really conducive to success. You want to play your guys a lot of minutes, and it makes sense, but they just can't defend with that group. It's not anybody's individual fault. It's just that the fact, throwing the fact that the Bulls guards played really well in this game, DeAndre Hunter chose a bad night to have arguably his worst game of the season. He was brutal in this one, and the bench wasn't any better. But more than anything, again, it was a personnel failure. Like, obviously, some of that is injuries that you can't control, especially to Jalen and Onyeka at the end of the year. Poor timing on those. But it was also a roster construction problem. And if you're a recurring listener, you will know that I talked about this throughout the season. But the Hawks did not do a good enough job of constructing their roster, especially on the forward line, with enough depth. And they only had 3 forwards coming into the year that were real established guys. 2 of them got hurt. That's unlucky, but also bad planning at the same time. And the only guys who I would describe as being above average defenders at the guard spots are a rookie in Kobe Buffkin, who's come a long way, but is still a rookie, and a guy in Trent Forrest, who's like your fringe 15th man type. Their starting guards are really good players. They're excellent players. And throwing Bogey in there as well, who really is more of a guard. But, Trae is what he is defensively. He's gotten better this year, but he was really bad tonight. He's playing with one hand, which I'll come back to later on, but should be emphasized a lot. He was playing with one hand if you watch the game, very obviously. Bogey's a minus defensively. That's not a secret to anybody. Even Murray, who had a great offensive game tonight, he was the best offensive player for sure. He got cooked by Chicago's guards throughout this game. In the same way that Trae was, the same way that Bogey was, Murray was just as bad defensively. White was blowing by him. Zuma was blowing by him. It wasn't like there was anybody that saved them defensively. You could argue that Garrison Matthews might have been better than those guys defensively, which is like not a high bar to clear, but still, in the end, like, it was a frustratingly bad defensive performance from Atlanta in this game. But if you take a sort of a step back or even a half step back and just look at the personnel, it's not that shocking that they couldn't get stops. Again, hats up to the Bulls. They played really well, especially White, who was just brilliant in this game. But it was a runway to the rim all night long. And when you can't defend the point of attack, it's been a familiar refrain the last 2 years, 3 years, basically, for the Hawks. They just are not good enough in that area. And when you throw in all the other issues with the forward line and playing as small as they were, it's hard to be small and not be able to contain the perimeter. That's not going to work for you. I mean, Capella has had a really good end of the season. He was their best defender in this game, but like, the combination of being super small, and they were super small the entire game, and also not being able to contain the ball, like, what are you stopping at that point in time? And that was the case in this one. So back to the numbers. The Bulls did shoot well from the field, 60% or so through 3 quarters, and regressed a little bit in the fourth, but they had 72 points in the paint. It was a runway from the perimeter all night long, again, because the containment was really bad. The Hawks only forced 10 turnovers in the game. I think half of those were in the fourth quarter. It was not a lot of ball pressure. The transition defense was a key that I talked about a lot coming into the game. It was really bad in this one, aided by some poor offense at times as well. It won't count, but Kobe White actually, because it was the play and it won't count, he had his career high tonight, 42 points. DeRozan actually didn't go crazy, but he kind of didn't have to because White did in his stead. So the Hawks basically did nothing well defensively in this game. I think, again, Capella was okay, and everybody else was really, really bad. It wasn't like Clint was dominant either. So the kindest thing that I could say about the Hawks is that it didn't get actually washed in the possession battle. Like, I previewed this game a lot the last couple of days, and it was like, all right, just don't get killed on the margins. And they actually didn't get killed on the margins in this game. It was the fact that the shooting efficiency and the way they allowed the Bulls to take quality shots at the rim the entire game really beat them. And I did mention the Hawks kind of needed to win 3-point line in this game. That was an area that they had a huge advantage in on paper. That didn't happen. Not only that, they actively lost the 3-point line in this game. They had the same number of makes as Chicago did, but the Bulls took 11 fewer attempts. So the Bulls made the same gains on way fewer attempts, and that was always going to be sort of a bad sign for Atlanta in this game. Briefly on the offense, we'll come back to it more as we get going on the podcast, of course, later on, but big picture, they had about a 115 offensive rating in this game. That isn't actually awful, but it's just not enough, obviously. It was better than that the first 3 quarters, but so as the defense was worse, so that kind of sort of counteracted itself. They shot pretty well on twos in this game, but 29% from 3, that was never going to be enough. The only guy who actually shot well, I guess 2 guys who shot pretty well, Murray and Garrison, but the combination of Hunter going 0 of 7, Bogey going 3 of 10, and even Wes Matthews going 0 of 2, those 3 guys combining for 3 of 17. That's going to be tough to overcome. Trae made 1 late that didn't matter. He didn't shoot the ball very well either. We'll come back to it individually, but Trae was pretty rough for at least probably half this game offensively. Hunter was terrible, honestly, the entire game. Murray was good. Capella was good. Bogey was fine. He was definitely normal Bogey, I would say, but it just wasn't enough to overcome everything else. They got to the line 28 times. That's actually a really good number for Atlanta. They had 30 assists. They had 11 turnovers. That's a really good ratio. So, again, they did a pretty good job on the margins, but they just got absolutely blitzed in shooting efficiency, which, again, coming in should have been an advantage for Atlanta. But they were so bad defensively, and honestly, with all that baked in, they probably needed to have a really good DeAndre Hunter game, and they got an actually actively bad DeAndre Hunter game. And then also, they needed to have a really good offensive game from probably all three, or at least two of the three of Murray, Bogey, and Trae. Murray was good. Bogey was okay, like solid, but Trae was not very good most of the way. So that combination, coupled with, again, I don't want to put too much of it on Hunter, but Hunter was so bad in this game. That kind of magnified itself, and the end result was not great. So some of that was maybe variance as far as the shooting especially was concerned. I think the Bulls were both good and maybe a little bit fortunate. But even then, it's hard to say that because they got such good looks the entire game. And yeah, I'm not surprised the Hawks lost. Before the game started, I said it on preview shows, the Hawks were underdogs in this game. Our friends at FanDuel had the Hawks as 3-point underdogs. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that the Hawks lost this game, even though I would have probably picked them narrowly to win. It was a coin flip at best, probably slight underdogs at worst. The surprise was how lopsided it got at times. But even then, like, again, just looking at the personnel available, I'm just not terribly surprised by really anything I saw. Outside of maybe Hunter being as bad as he was, like Trae playing with one hand wasn't very good. Defensively, the Hawks were awful. But yeah, that was kind of foreseeable. So all that said, like it's one game, but it's also a win or go home game, and they lost it. And now that's the end of the season. We'll get into kind of the details of how this one unfolded in a second. But zooming back out quickly, like perhaps it could be indicative of the future. Perhaps this might be a wake-up call to some in the front office. We'll talk about that a lot, I'm sure, in the next couple of weeks and months. But like, you don't want to put too much on this, but it also is kind of a flashing red light when it comes to like how bad the defense is going to be at times on the perimeter. The combination of these three perimeter guys you have together, not only Trae and DeJounte, but also Bogey, and their, three of their best 6 players are these guys who probably can't play together, and that's a little bit of a challenge. So anyway, we'll leave it there for now. We'll have more coming up on the ins and outs of this one, but first a word from Monopoly Go. I've been told repeatedly that I'm a competitive person, and I definitely admit that I definitely have a competitive side. I think we all do on some level. My competitive side is a big fan, though, of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it, but it's been downloaded 150 million times. That's a lot of downloads for one app. It's a great twist of Monopoly where you play not just one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards at crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. The best part, though, honestly, is being able to mess with your friends in the best possible way. You can charge them rent on your iconic properties, just like the classic Monopoly. You can also rob them of their vaults of riches for yourself. And the leaderboard show you just who the biggest Monopoly tycoon happens to be. It's not just the competitive side that loves it as well. You can also have fun and be friendly with your friends if you want to do that. Team up together and play with people around the world in time tournaments to earn huge rewards. Get in the game now and join your friends by downloading Monopoly Go. You can do it now for free on the App Store or Google Play Store. One more time, download Monopoly Go today. All right, so we'll dive in now to how this kind of game unfolded. If you're a new listener, we'll kind of go start to finish, talk about like my observations throughout this one. It's kind of a disjointed start to this game. Both teams not really shooting the ball super well early on. I think Capella was really active to start the game. 8 points, 5 rebounds in the first 7 minutes. Like he was pretty good all the way through, honestly. Hunter had the DeRozan assignment, did an okay job, and that was kind of the only thing he did okay in this game. Honestly, was kind of keep DeRozan somewhat in check, but not a ton of force from DeAndre from the start, and that kind of never came. The Bulls actually lost a challenge right away, which is usually helpful for the Hawks to burn one like that, but I didn't love a couple of the possessions offensively, like decision-making wise. Hunter passed a 3 up and then took like a long contested 2. That was not a great decision. The Hawks didn't make a 3 for like 7 or 8 minutes in this game. Process-wise, like DeJounte had it going, but other than that, it was not very good. Turnovers, Trae was not good in the first quarter. Rotationally. So I previewed this a lot. There were 7 guys I was almost entirely sure were going to play. The 5 starters plus Garrison and Bruno. That actually happened. No surprises there. But then, number one, they kept Garrison on a very short leash. I'll talk about this more later on, but the 5 starters played 37 minutes or more. And that's in a game where the fourth quarter was basically academic the entire way through. So they were not fooling around in this game. But they tried a lineup in the first quarter that and this is not revisionist, I said it in real time on Twitter. You can check this if you want to. I hated it, and I thought it was a terrible decision by Quinn. So they tried a lineup that had, yes, I think it was Trae and Bogey on the perimeter, but it was Wes Matthews, Mo Gay, and Bruno Fernando together. And I think you just can't do that. Now, I'm not surprised that they tried Mo Gay. I did say on the show this week that I thought they were going to play Wes if he was healthy, and he was healthy, he did play. I thought they might try Mo Gay in the first half, and if it didn't work, they'd pull him. I would not have put those guys together. And in a not shocking twist, that lineup was -9 in about 2 minutes, and it looked awful. It didn't function. Fortunately, they pulled the plug on it. Mo never came back in, but that's the kind of lineup that you just can't run in a game like this. Like, would it have mattered in the end? I kind of think not, but I just don't understand even the process there. Like, you did not need to pair those guys up together. I just didn't understand it. So there you go. Anyway, the end of the first quarter was not friendly to Atlanta. The first two notable runs of the game happened to Chicago, actually a 10-3 run to go up by 7 in the middle of the quarter. Then a big run was coming at the end of the first quarter, a 16-2 run from the Bulls over the last 3.5 minutes or so. The Hawks were only down by 4 when Capella went to the bench. And that continued to kind of follow a trend where Clint has been the on-off king for like the last 2.5 months. Essentially, anytime Clint is sat, not every single time, but broadly speaking, he has a huge on-off split since like the middle of February, and that continued in this game. As soon as he left the floor, it was a huge run. Part of that was the Wes, Mo, and Bruno lineup, but it wasn't just that. They were down 18 at the end of the first quarter. They were awful in the first quarter, honestly, on both sides of the floor. Trae had 5 turnovers. He was really bad to start this game. We'll come back to Trae later on, but basically he had a terrible first quarter, and he was kind of okay after that, but he was really bad there, and that kind of clouded the entire game, I thought, for him in general, and of course playing again with one hand. But defensively, it was a mess, and part of that was transition, and we'll have more on that later on. There was, though, a big Hawks run to come, a 14-0 run to open the second quarter. So the Hawks, you're down 18. Like, I would always stress to people like that don't watch a lot of NBA basketball, an 18-0 deficit in the first half is not the end of the world. Like, it's not great, but you're very much alive. It's not over, etc. And the Hawks showed that right away. A big run, 14-0. They made their first 5 shots. The Bulls missed their first 5 shots. DeJounte was red hot early on. He had 19 points in his first 12 minutes of this one. He cooled off a lot as the game went along, but he was really good in that first half, really cooking, get them back in the game. I thought Garrison was really bad in his first stint, but he came back and played better in the second stint. Hunter, I have this in my notes again. The Bulls had a nice response mid-quarter. Hunter was really bad in that stretch. The Hawks did have a nice run at the end of the first half to get back within 3, actually a 12-2 run. Trae found it a little bit after his nightmare first quarter. He had a 3, got to the line a couple times. He had a nice lob to Clint. Also, notably, he took his brace off. I'm not in Chicago, as you can see if you're watching this podcast. I would like to know what the response was there. Trae talked a lot in Atlanta the last week or so about how he wasn't like technically required to wear the brace, but it gave him confidence. He'd been wearing it a lot, and I'm sure it was frustration, but I would like to know how that affected him. We'll see. But and maybe won't see, but it was offhand, etc. He did actually he had a terrible final minute, though. I will say Trae had this brutal. He went for a steal. He looked to be like he was gassed at the end of the quarter. He threw a bad pass to DeJounte, and that led to a 6-point deficit at the half. So the Hawks did score 45 points in the second quarter. 45. They shot the heck out of the ball in that quarter. They had 5 threes. They had 2 turnovers. It's kind of crazy, though. They had this is the scoring by quarter in this game: 22, 45, 25, 24. So they had 3 pretty bad offensive quarters and 1 great offensive quarter in this one. And they made 5 of their 11 threes in that quarter. The rest of the game, they were 6 of 30 from 3. So tough scene. The offense, though, was really good. Capella had 16 at the half. DeJounte had 23 at the half. Defensively, though, it was really, really bad. No surprise there. Early in the second quarter, it was kind of like break even for the most part. There was actually a great cut by DeJounte off a rebound by Clint. Ended up being a dunk for him, kind of a hammer dunk on Vucevic. That was a big highlight. Trae was a little bit better to start the third quarter, had 7 points in a row, basically. Hunter got on board finally. He made his first shot after him missing his first 8 shots. Then I would say fittingly, he nearly airballed a free throw. That was a tough one for DeAndre. Then the wheels, though, came totally flying off. I'll just note this. Trae hits a step-back 3 with about 5 minutes to go. And after that shot goes in by Trae, it's 88-85. So the Hawks have gone from being down as many as 18 in the first half. They're down 88-85 with 5 minutes to go in the third quarter. Keep that in mind. From there, a 17-2 run by the Bulls to essentially end the game. Now, we didn't know that at the time, but that was essentially the end of the game. The Hawks scored 2 points on 9 possessions in about 4 minutes. And White went crazy on offense. He had 11 points in that period of time. They were down by 21 or so by the end of the third quarter. The frustration would kind of set in at that point. They gave up 110 through 3 quarters. But that run ended up being kind of what put the game away. Again, I would always stress the Hawks were not dead at that point. Being down 18 without much time left, you're not dead. We've seen them blow leads like that. We've seen them make comebacks like that. It's doable, but that ended up being what separated the game because the fourth quarter, honestly, I have very few notes. Like I have some, but they're not even really relevant at this point in time because they started the fourth quarter with stars on the floor, which I thought was the right decision. It did kind of augur that they had to play a ton of minutes if they were to get back in the game. They probably would have been tired at the end, but down 18 going to the fourth, you have to make a run. And the Hawks, I think fittingly, had no confidence in their bench in this game. So they started the starters and they basically played the entire way. The run never came. The Bulls, I think, smartly slowed the pace down. It was 11-10 through like 7.5 minutes of the fourth quarter. Like it was just a slugfest. the Hawks won the fourth quarter technically, but they were within 15 again. Fittingly, I will say this: if you're listening regularly, you'll know that I've had kind of a gripe with Quinn all year long about like keeping guys in too long in lopsided games, either winning or losing. And I get it; it's a play-in game. You lose if you go home, so this is not quite as glaring as some other games that were more meaningless. But four of the starters played the entire fourth quarter in a game that was over with 4 minutes to go, I would say. Maybe even more than that, but over. Like Clint played the whole fourth quarter. Clint Capella played his season high minutes tonight in a game that was never competitive in the fourth quarter. DeJounte played 46 minutes in a game that, again, was never competitive in the fourth quarter. They never even like courteously went to like, some teams would you just go to young guys at the end just to say, hey, it's a playoff game. Kobe, you get to play. You're a rookie. Mo Gay, I guess he got in. But they could have played Trent. They could have played Kobe just to say they got out there. Never did that. No subs. Just played the starters all the way to the end. Fittingly, didn't really matter a ton, but that would have been something. Anyway, it was a letdown. As we got into earlier with the numbers, like it was not the performance that anybody wanted. The fourth quarter made it seem probably closer than it was. The Hawks were soundly outplayed through three quarters. In the fourth quarter, they made it a little bit closer. It was never really competitive. The run just never came. They had a chance. They were in it-ish. And then, but again, down 88-85 with 17 minutes to go in the game. And the Bulls just were a much better team from that point forward. And that was the end of that. All right, we'll have more coming up on the player-by-player breakdowns. And there's much to say about this game on that front. But first, a word from our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. It's playoff time in the NBA, of course, and the NHL. Beyond that, baseball is also in full swing, and FanDuel is the #1 sportsbook in America. It's the place to use for each and every game. And right now, if you're a new customer, get $150 in terms of dollars and bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 in your pocket you can use to bet on hoops, baseball, hockey, and so much more. But on all of your favorite basketball players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and much more. The app is safe, it's secure, it's easy to use, and they use everything. They basically have everything that you're looking for there in terms of over-unders and money lines, player props, future bets, and much more. They cover the whole range of sports. They have the NBA, they have the NFL, college football when it's in season, of course, MLB, college baseball, golf, tennis, soccer, auto racing, boxing, MMA, and much more. And now is an awesome time to sign up with folks at FanDuel Sportsbook, and the place to go is FanDuel.com/lockedon. One more time, just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, and to the players in this game. If you're unfamiliar, what we do here is talk about all the guys who played, and I will at least mention one guy who did not because he was ineligible to play. I spent a lot of time talking about V. Krejci in the last week. If you're just arriving, I got some questions even today about people that just didn't know what had happened. V was ineligible to play. He's still on a two-way contract. I got questions about like what kind of difference that would have made if he was able to play. It would have helped. I said this on the show earlier this week. At the very least, the one thing everyone can agree on with V, in my opinion, is that the Hawks did not maximize their win probability for this game. If all that mattered in the world was this game, they would have needed V to be their best possible self. Would he have fixed them in every way in this game? No. Would he have helped? I think probably yes, defensively on some level. But he wasn't available. I criticized that move this week. I don't think it was as crazy as some. And we'll see what they do long-term with him. But that happened. He was ineligible to play. They had 12 guys available. 3 of them did not play. That was Bufkin, Forrest, and Griffin. No surprises there, honestly. I thought Kobe might play, but I thought it was unlikely. I mentioned before, Mo Gay played 2 minutes. It went disastrously. It wasn't his fault. Like, he was part of the problem, but he's a rookie playing in his first play-in postseason playoff, whatever you want to say, game. 2 points, -9, didn't record a stat. Looked a little bit lost. Not a surprise. The future is very bright for Mo Gay. I like that. I like him a lot. The tools there. It's kind of been a lost year for him because of the injuries, but knock on wood, hopefully he is healthy and ready to go this summer because 6'11", really good athlete, really good skill level, can shoot it, can fly around, and obviously the upside there is tantalizing. Elsewhere, Bruno Fernando played 10 minutes, 5 points, 2 fouls, -10. He just wasn't very good. And Bruno's, I've said this before, I'll say it again now. Bruno, I think, is really a nice guy to have as the third center. If he's your backup center, you're probably looking for a better backup center. And doesn't mean he can't do it, but I think that the drop-off from Clint to Bruno has been pretty stark the last couple of months, honestly. And Bruno's offensive game looks good sometimes. Like, he's actually a lot more like skill with the ball in his hands than Clint is. That's not like a debate. He just is. But defensively, the drop-off is just so massive. I think he got figured out a little bit at the end of the season. So Bruno everybody likes, and including me, but I thought he was not particularly great. He wasn't awful either, but it is what it is. Wes Matthews played 10 minutes, took 2 shots, missed them both. I kind of thought he would play. I was pretty confident he would play in this game as long as he was available to play because they just need another body. He executed defensively, but even then he's limited to say the least. And then Garrison Matthews actually was +4 in the game off the bench. 8 points for Garrison, had 2 threes. He had 4 fouls in 13 minutes, so he was aggressive to a fault on some level. But I thought he was very clearly the guy they trusted the most beyond the starters. It's just that he's still small and limited, and if you're trying to what are you supposed to do, basically? I thought Garrison had a good end of the season, had a good season overall. He's right at the top of the league in 3-point shooting this year. I think he's a proven NBA, deeper rotation guy, but if he's your 10th, 11th, 12th guy, that's a pretty good spot. I think he's going to be in the league for a while. He's earned that. He had a good year, and I thought he was useful in this game despite the limitations. To the starters. Let's get out of the way now. DeAndre Hunter, 8 points, 3 of 16 shooting, 0 of 7 from 3, 3 of 9 on 2s, 4 assists, 2 rebounds. I thought he was just downright awful, honestly. And that doesn't mean that he's a terrible player, because he's not. John Hollinger, friend of the podcast, who I often sit close to at Hawks games, mentioned hey, he was almost afraid to say Hunter had a pretty good year. It's true. I think Hunter generally had his best season this year, but he was really, really, really not good in this game. And I'm not telling you that the Hawks win this game if he plays well, but it would have been a lot more competitive. I thought I teased this earlier, but I thought given the matchup and given who else they had available, given they had to contain DeRozan, they were going to need 38 to 42 minutes of DeAndre Hunter playing well in this game. He played 42 minutes. He stayed out of foul trouble, which I asked Quinn about this week. He did a good job there, but he just didn't have it. Offensively, it was a mess. Defensively, is not his best work. Not terribly physical. 2 rebounds in 42 minutes is brutal. He just didn't have it. And I feel bad for DeAndre because he had a pretty good year. People are gonna just remember this game, but he really was very bad in this one. Capella on the bright side, I thought Capella was really quite good actually. 22 points, 17 rebounds, 4 assists, no turnovers, 11-15 from the floor. He finished around the rim. He hit some hook shots in this one. I know that there is a segment of the fan base that's just done with Clint, and I do understand because when it looks bad, it looks bad. He had a really rough stretch in the middle of the season this year. They want to pave the way for Capella, for Okongwu. They want to clear the way. Even I, as resident Capella guy, I argued last summer, a year ago, that he should have been traded. I thought he should have been traded. I've said that. But separate that from the way he's played the last 2.5 months. He's been really, really, really good. And I think that's notable. And they were really good when he's on the floor. They had a +8 net rating over 2 months with him on the court. That's elite level play. And they were -12 net rating with him off the floor. That's not all on him. There's some luck involved, but he's been playing really well. And he was really good in this game. So that was one of the smaller bright spots. He wasn't awesome defensively. Obviously, he wasn't perfect. Nobody was defensively. It was a mess. But I thought he did his job in this game. Another guy who played well, DeJounte Murray, 30 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists for DeJounte, 2 steals. He was 8 of 15 on 2s, 3 of 6 on 3s. Played very well offensively, for sure. He kept them in the game at times. In that first half, especially, when Trae sat, they had the big run with DeJounte. He was carrying them. He was really hot. He did cool off, but I thought offensively he was by far their best player in this one. Defensively, I said it before, but he really was not good. He has a reputation. I've been over this a lot, but if you're a new listener, DeJounte's reputation defensively greatly outpaces what he actually does at this point. I think at this point he's a pretty soundly below average defender. And this game he was actively bad, as were most guys, but he was getting torched by Dosunmu, by White, etc. But big picture, 37-6, he had the offensive game that he had to have the Hawks kind of be in the game, and kudos to him for that. And really, another hat tip to DeJounte, honestly, for as long as Trae, I talked about it a lot when it happened, but when Trae was out, DeJounte carried a huge workload. He did it well. He scored at a high level. He kept the Hawks in games. He won games for them. He played, again, 46 minutes tonight and carried it. So, separating everything, and I know there's going to be a blood feud war about trading Trae and DeJounte. I'm not looking forward to talking about that. We're going to have to at some point. But separating all of that, DeJounte just played well at the end of the season. The last 2 months, he was, whether Trae was there or not, he played well. He upped his status, I think. He upped his trade value, if you want to view it that way. I'm not sure you have to view it that way, but I thought DeJounte did a good job, and that included tonight, despite his defensive shortcomings, we'll say. Bogey was a bogey in this game. As usual, the Hawks were better with him on the floor than off. He was +1, and again, they lost by 15 points. Pretty indicative. That's been bogey all year long. That's one of the reasons that I think he's a 6th man of the year front runner for me. I don't think he's going to win it, but he might be in the mix for it. But anyway, 21 points, 4 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks. He was 5 of 8 on 2s, 3 of 10 on 3s. He was efficient-ish in this one. Bogey had a great year. He really did. He was healthy all year long, which is impressive for given all of his knee issues that he's had in the past. He had a really good season. Very viable player. I think it remains underrated how much he helps in offense, generally speaking, with his gravity, his ability to play on ball, off ball. Yes, defensively, he's not particularly good at this point, but offensively, he's very well suited. Six man is a great spot for him to be in, and I thought he had a great year. I'll come back to him more later on. And then finally, we have Trae Young. So I teased it earlier. I think they did spend a lot of time on the broadcast, I will say, about how he had the brace on and then had the brace off. Cassidy Hubbard did a good interview, I guess hit on the sideline in the first quarter explaining what Trae can and can't do with the hand, which I thought was good context for people to hear. Trae's talked to the media a couple times in Atlanta before this about how he couldn't close his hand, basically. He does not have full range of motion there. He does not have full strength there. He did talk about how he's been not like required to wear the huge brace, which I've noted like is the biggest brace I've ever seen for a guard in the NBA that he was wearing. In the end, just on the floor tonight, Trae was not very good. He had 5 turnovers in the first half. He ended up with in the first quarter. Only one more the rest of the game. He ended up with 22 and 10. That's misleading. He wasn't particularly good offensively. He had some nice stretches in this one. Got to the line 13 times. After the first quarter, I thought he was fine by his standards. He was bad in the first quarter. Defensively, he was really bad. I mean, there's no way around it. I thought for the season, he improved quite a bit. Tonight, it was kind of like his old self. He was pretty rough. But I think it's, a lot of it's like, look at Trae Young's numbers. Look at the plus. He's very obviously hurt / compromised. Like, it's hard to have a referendum on a guy who's playing with one hand. I don't think he should have come back based on what I've seen physically. And the fact that he was hesitant to even go left, hesitant to shoot with his left hand and dribble his left hand and attack with his left hand. Like, he obviously could do it. He was not like risking anything, I don't think, but he just didn't look like himself. Anyway, there's going to be a probably irresponsible narrative discussion at some point about this, but I wouldn't make too much of tonight. He wasn't very good. I'll be honest with you. He wasn't. But we'll leave it there. He had some really rough moments, the turnovers, the defense. Like, if he had played his A game, this would have been a more competitive game. I still think that Hunter was like much more damaging than Trae, just in a lower key way because he's not as famous as Trae Young is. But the two of them would have been nice to have better from both those guys in this game. All right. That's all I have on this game. There's a lot of stuff going on in the future that we can probably get to that I will not touch on beyond just saying it out loud now. We'll have plenty of time to talk about all this stuff, but there's a lot of stuff going on this summer. So here's a brief list of storylines that we'll cover in the next several months. Jalen Johnson is extension eligible and is probably going to be asking and should deserve a lot of money. Sadiq Bey is a free agent this summer. So is Vit Krejci. Restricted? Yes, both those guys are restricted, but free agents nonetheless. The Hawks are once again right up against the tax line, and it's that familiar dance the last couple of years of the Hawks. Will they or won't they go over it? I've been saying for a while they won't go over it. This year, I don't know yet. Last 2 years, I've been 100% correct that they were not going to go over the tax line. They actively made the team worse 2 summers in a row. 2 summers in a row, they made the team worse to save money. We'll see what happens this summer. Of course, there's the big question nationally, locally, even about whether they're going to trade DeJounte, whether they're going to trade even Trae. That's going to be a talking point. It already is. We'll see. Beyond that, broader than that even, how much of an overhaul are they thinking right now after 3 kind of disappointing seasons in a row? Are they going to change big stuff, small stuff? How about center? Is Capella going to be on the move at some point in time? His last year on his contract is next season. Young guys, AJ Griffin, Mo Gay, Kobe Buffkin. What's next for those guys? A lot happening there. On Friday, the Hawks fans have a game to watch. The Kings game will affect their draft pick situation for this next year. And by the way, the draft is a big thing already because the Hawks, with their loss tonight, are officially in the lottery. They have the 10th best lottery odds. They have a 14% chance to get in the top 4 of the draft. If they had made the playoffs, they would have picked 15th. It would have been firm. 15th would have been the pick. Now they didn't make the playoffs. They actually cannot pick lower than 11th. They'll pick either 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, or 11, I believe. At least something like that, or close to it. It would be very unlucky if they went below 11. Maybe they technically can, but it's like sub 1%. Regardless, I'll have those numbers for you in one place in the near future. But that's the next big topic. We're about 2 months away from the draft. They might have 2 first-round picks. At the very least, they're going to have a lottery pick of their own, and that's the next step on the agenda. But plenty to get to. I would encourage you to subscribe to this podcast. We'll have a much, much, much deeper breakdown of the state of things on the roster, what's to come. This game being disappointing certainly is there. I'll just say this at the end of the podcast. This is a very disappointing season for Atlanta. I'll kind of sign off with that. It's been a frustrating year. the injuries, the underperformance, the lack of cohesion, the lack of improvement, the fact that they ran it back, quote unquote, from last year, only to have this happen and be the 10 seed and lose in this fashion. And yes, by the end of the year, the roster was not what it was supposed to be given the injuries, but they didn't improve the deadline. They didn't do anything at the deadline, actually. So all those things, like, I get it. Fans are frustrated and angry, or just, apathetic, or whatever it's going to be. Frustration level is high. I get that too. It was a rough year for Atlanta. There's still some stuff to be excited about. I think there's lots of talent in the pipeline. We'll see what the future holds, but I will be here covering it all. So please go ahead right now and subscribe to the podcast anywhere you get your podcast, but certainly where you're listening now or watching now: YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Cast, where they are in all those places. Please leave ratings and reviews. If you want to help the podcast, the best possible way to do that is to subscribe and auto-download the show, even multiple times. If you want to go ahead and do that just to help me out on Spotify, Apple, 3 or 4 places, go ahead and do that. I'd be very much appreciated. Also, share the podcast with your friends and family. That would be huge to help us grow the show in the offseason. YouTube as well, easy to share and like and subscribe, and social media, all that stuff. Follow the show on Twitter/X at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there as well at BT Rowland. I also do some extra stuff on the Hawks and Braves on my own. That's at patreon.com/BT Rowland. I write a little bit there. I share some press conference audio there. I do some Brave stuff there every once in a while. That's an extra place to support me if you want to go ahead and do that. Also, on the audio only feeds of this podcast, you will also see some stuff from Locked On Sports Atlanta. I don't know what they're going to do in the offseason, but they've been doing post-game shows. You'll probably see that in your feed as well. So just some extra stuff there. Nothing less for me. And just so everybody knows, the plan, generally speaking, is I'll have probably one more show this week, wrapping up X interviews or whatever is going to happen. Then we'll kind of be in off-season mode from there. Still 3 or 4 shows a week after that. So we're never going to slow down too much. Stay tuned for that. It's a full speed ahead of the draft at this point in time. Thank you very much for listening to the show. This is almost episode 1700. We're almost there, but I've been covering the Hawks for 13 years. I've been doing this podcast for 8 years at this point in time. It's been a lot. It's a lot going on, but I do appreciate all the support. I genuinely do. I could not do any of this stuff without you listening and watching the podcast. So thank you very much from the bottom of my heart on all of that. And I'll have more coming up. So please stay tuned. We'll see you all next time.